Sean, great to see you. Thanks for taking some time out of your busy schedule to chat with us on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me again, Seth. Really appreciate it.
It's great to have you back, and a lot has happened since we last chatted on the podcast. You are the political director for Clean Water Action and the campaign manager for Oil and Water Don't Mix, which is the big coalition that has galvanized over the last several years around Line 5. So let's start there. There have been some significant um, pieces of news and some legal changes that have happened in the Line 5 struggle in the recent weeks. And I would love to just pass you the mic and let you kind of catch us up to speed.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had some really big developments on Line 5 recently with back in March, we were finally able to get Nessel versus Enbridge up to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. And story of kind of how we got there. This was the case filed way back in 2019 by Attorney General Nessel before Governor Whitmer even revoked Enbridge's easement. And so this case argues basically that the easement for Line 5 should be considered void on its face because the state didn't consider their duties to protect the Great Lakes under the public trust doctrine when they issued the easement back in 53. And so, Enbridge voluntarily litigated this case in state court for over 2 years. And frankly, it didn't seem to be going very well for them. In fact, at one point in the summer of 2020, the Ingham County the Ingham County court judge granted Attorney General Nessel a temporary restraining order, shutting down Line 5 for one leg of it for a couple months, the whole pipeline for a few weeks. And a judge isn't supposed to grant a temporary restraining order unless there is at least a decent chance that the party that moves that has a good chance at prevailing in the case. And so with the judge granting the temporary restraining order, we thought that was a great move. And, that was, of course, right after Enbridge damaged Line 5 again in the summer of 2020. Then a while later, all the way into 2021, when Enbridge and the state both had cross motions for summary disposition, which, means they basically said, we're going to agree to the facts and we want the judge to decide this based on the law. They had cross motions for summary disposition, and Enbridge at that point tried to move this to federal court. When there's a 30-day period from when a case is filed that you're allowed to move it to federal court, or allowed to try to move it to federal court. But anyway, the Enbridge tried that. The first federal court judge in the Western District of Michigan accepted the case. And Attorney General Nessel she kept up a good fight, arguing that this ought to be sent back to state court. It's a clear state issue. So then in March, we got our day in front of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Attorney General's team, led by Dan Bach in the AG's office, did a really great job pushing back against Enbridge, and were able to get a ruling sending this case back to state court. It was a great day to see our taxpayer dollars well used with Dan Bach making arguments that destroyed Enbridge in the courtroom back in March. But so we got that ruling. This is going to be heading back to state court where it should be decided. And with cross motions for summary disposition waiting, we're hopeful that we get some rulings in this case relatively quickly. And this could force Line 5 to be shut down after the appeals.
What would that look like, Sean? Like what is the outcome that would lead to a permanent shutdown?
Well, that's the remedy that the Attorney General's asking for in the case. So the trial court, let's say, for the sake of argument, let's say the trial court agrees with Attorney General Nessel and orders the pipeline shut down. We could see a shutdown there. More likely, we'd see Enbridge asking for a stay until they appeal, which they would probably get. This would be appealed to the state appeals court. Regardless really of how the state appeals court rules, this would probably then be appealed by either party to the state Supreme Court, and the state Supreme Court would make their decision. And, after that, it would be much more difficult for Enbridge to try to get a stay and move this up to the U.S. Supreme Court, because it's already been decided by the Sixth Circuit that this was a matter of state law. So the state Supreme Court could really be making the final ruling here. And we're hopeful that the state process, could move quickly, given, all the evidence that we have at hand and the fact that they need to act to protect the Great Lakes.
Wow. Fantastic. And you feel optimistic?
Yeah, I think that, the Attorney General has a really great team working on this, and they've made all the right arguments so far. These are real public servants who care about working to protect our Great Lakes and environment. I think they're going to do an excellent job, and I'm confident that they stand a good chance of victory here.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So beyond following this case, what are some other calls to action that you're lifting up around Line 5 right now through Oil and Water Don't Mix and Clean Water Action?
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on Line 5 at the federal level right now as well, and internationally. And give folks a taste of some of the cool things coming up. So on July 25th, which is the 14th anniversary of the Kalamazoo oil spill, we are going to be hosting, there will be more to come on this, but we're going to be having some protest actions in Michigan and elsewhere, including working with some allies in not only Wisconsin, but in Canada, to call attention to Enbridge and, the ultimate risks of oil spill that we have from Line 5 and elsewhere throughout this region, because we have, this really untrustworthy oil giant running tons of oil that we don't need through our region, so that they can turn a profit. So we have a big day of action coming up on July 25th. There will be a lot more to come in the next couple weeks on that, and we'd love for people to be able to come out and join us, including we're still finalizing locations. Otherwise, I'd share those right now. We also have, after that, we have allies throwing some really cool events. Labor Day weekend, there is the Pipe Out paddle flotilla out on the Straits of Mackinac. I think it's launching from the St. Ignace side this year, but that's going to be the Saturday morning of Labor Day weekend. Wonderful event. And then there's also the Water is Life Festival being held in Petoskey on Labor Day weekend, which, started really around activism, around indigenous-led activism around protecting our Great Lakes and Line 5. And so those are some really great events coming up. We're really encouraging folks to keep pressure on their members of Congress and keep talking to their members of Congress about Line 5. Federal actors here can really make a big difference. And then somebody else who can make a big difference here within the Biden administration is actually Traverse City's one of Traverse City's newer residents, Department of Transportation head Pete Buttigieg. And Buttigieg, back when he was running for president, actually tweeted about how Line 5 needs to be shut down. And as the head of the Department of Transportation, he oversees the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which is one of those federal regulators that does have all the authority they need to shut down Line 5 as soon as they want. And we believe they have the best arguments. So, asking people to reach out to Secretary Buttigieg, as well as to their members of Congress, their U.S. senators, those are all great things to do. And we have ways to contact them at oilandwaterdon'tmix.org. We have actions up that everybody can use, and you can leave exactly what we have in there. You can write your own, email, you can call them, all sorts of things you can do to get involved on this.
Fantastic. Well, I've seen some members of Congress talk about Line 5, so it has reached the national stage. And Rashida was the first one that I saw bring it vocally to the president's attention. And I love that the Water is Life Festival continues year after year with our friend Janann Cornstalk, leading the way. It's such a beautiful kind of marriage of like a cultural celebration with music and art, but there's also a ceremonial aspect to it. There are indigenous traditions that are built into this to help people not just know what they're against, but what they're for, to be in relationship with water and recognize the way water connects us and why we're in this together to stand up to whoever we need to stand up to, no matter how big they are and
Yep.
what tactics they use.
And I think it's also, I love, you're right. It's such a great marriage of different elements. And, I love to point, it always reminds me at least that, there's never really been an effective progressive movement anywhere in the world without that musical and artistic and spiritual backing, without that backbone, not only of what we're against and what we're fighting to stop, but that better world that we're fighting for, what we want to change and who we are as people. And that event, I think, always weds those together just perfectly.
Yes, absolutely. So you're involved in Lansing politics. You really have your, hand on the pulse and your ear to the ground. And I really count on you for, updates and strategies. So I just want to check in and see how things are going in the world of clean water in Lansing these days.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Seth. I mean, this has been an interesting time with our state legislature. We have a lot of big time champions who have been elected to office in Lansing, but there's still a lot that stands in the way. When we talk about environmental issues, there were definitely some positives in the energy legislation passed last fall. There were also some downfalls to that we're going to have to address coming up here in the future. Aside from that, we've seen movement on Senator Stephanie Chang, for example, has had a great package of bills to create a statewide water affordability program, which would essentially guarantee that residents who are earning less than 200% of the federal poverty line would not have to pay more than 3% of their income for their drinking water. And that's, an incredibly important program that we're hoping to see get across the finish line in this legislature. We've already had hearings in the state house and in the state senate, and we'd love to see that pass. There's a lot of other programs that, we're hoping when lawmakers get back to work, they're going into a pretty long recess here with just a few session days between now and the November election. We're hoping they can make the best of their time there working on things like water affordability or the polluter pay package to hold corporate polluters accountable and start to change the equation in Michigan, where we have over 26,000 contaminated sites. And, companies really aren't required. There's not enough in the law that requires them to be actively cleaning these up. And there's loads of other issues that need to be worked on. And we're hopeful that in the few session days before the election and when the legislature comes back after the election for a lame duck session, we're very hopeful to see some of these policies worked on. But honestly, Seth, one of the big things standing in the way in Lansing politics, and it's not a surprise, it's a bipartisan problem. When the Republicans were in charge, the two biggest funders of the Republican caucus in the state house and the state senate were DTE and Consumers Energy. Today, with the Democrats in charge, the two biggest funders of the Democratic caucuses in Lansing are DTE and Consumers Energy. These big monopoly utilities, as well as lots of government contractors, groups like Blue Cross Blue Shield, and other entities, have an immense amount of lobbying power in Lansing because of the amount of money that they're allowed to spend on our political process. And, the ethics of the way that money is wielded is a huge problem, because you have companies that are reliant on the government for their business. DTE and Consumers would not be these monopoly utilities covering most of our state without the say-so of the state government, without the state government allowing that. There's tons of companies like Blue Cross Blue Shield and others that are government contractors, where they, make a lot of their money in government contracts, and then they spend some of that money lobbying to make sure that they can grow those contracts every year. So, at Clean Water Action, one of the things we really like to look at is how can we change the root of the problem. What can we do? What campaigns can we win that aren't just going to solve one issue, but that might be a watershed moment when we're looking at the environmental and justice issues we have in the state as a whole. And so, we are right now working in the Taking Back Our Power coalition, where we're supporting a package of bills that would stop both regulated utilities, so companies like DTE and consumers, as well as all government contractors with contracts worth over $250,000, which includes Blue Cross Blue Shield, includes Aramark, who Aramark famously was selling, or was the state was paying Aramark for rotten food with mold on it in prisons, things like that. It would stop all of these companies and their principal officers from being able to spend money in politics. And when I say spend money in politics, I mean, they would not be able to contribute to 501c4s. They would not be able to contribute to 527s, to political action committees, super PACs, candidates, or candidate committees. And until we get rid of the influence of that type of money in our political system, we're really going to be limited as to the solutions that we have legislatively. And so, we're looking at that as something that when we change that equation, things like polluter pay will be a lot easier to pass, because you won't have giant campaign donors on the other side of the table saying, wait, if you pass this legislation, we're going to give our money to your opponents.
Wow. Yeah, it's kind of the same old fascist song and dance of the merging of state and corporate powers.
Yep.
But that's what we got to do. We got to keep going upstream to find the problem. And I know there's been people like our friend Michelle Martinez who've been working toward this kind of a solution for the better part of the last couple decades. And folks in Detroit have been working on this energy democracy for as long as I've been involved in it. So
yeah. And the energy democracy piece, I think has really started to pick up steam as well. That's something, I'm really interested to see with, we've been working closely with Ann Arbor for Public Power, which is seeking to break away from DTE and form a municipal utility. And the nice thing about it happening in Ann Arbor is Ann Arbor, has some wealth behind it as a city. They can actually afford to win the lawsuits that'll be necessary in this process. And that'll kind of open the way and make it less expensive for other municipalities to do the same. But yeah, I mean, in the long run, it would be great to see us switch from relying on private regulated industry to actually having state and municipal run utilities everywhere. In fact, I was kind of doing a deep dive recently on the history of power generation in the United States. And I thought it was really interesting, because it's not something we talk about a lot these days, but that Franklin Roosevelt and a lot of the thought leaders in the Roosevelt administration who established most of the public power entities in the country, they thought that having power owned by the public was not only the most efficient way to provide power, but was also a moral necessity. And, that train of thinking somehow got lost along the way. And I think we've seen the fallbacks from having private industry do things that everybody needs. The profit motive simply doesn't help DTE and consumers keep the lights on.
Yes. Yeah. Good. Well, so you mentioned 501c4, and so Clean Water Action is a 501c3 and a 501c4. Is that correct?
Yes, we have both. Our 501c3 is Clean Water Fund, and we do a lot of education work and other things through there. And then our 501c4, Clean Water Action, and with Clean Water Action, we do a lot of lobbying, and we also actually endorse candidates who are running for office, and also ballot initiatives and other things like that. And so, we've actually already begun our endorsement process for the 2024 election. And happy to share that we have kind of our first round of State House champions all approved for endorsement for this year. And so those people, some of them sure are very familiar with your listeners. We have out in State House District 26, we have Dylan Wigela. We have Emily Devendorf in State House 77 here in the Lansing area. We also have Betsy Kofia, our State House rep up in Traverse City in the 103rd District. Also Jen Hill from Marquette, State House 109. Donovan McKinney in State House District 11 in the Detroit area. Penelope Cernoglu from East Lansing, State House 75. Kimberly Edwards, also in the Detroit area in State House District 12. And then we've also endorsed, I think I said Jamie Churches in the 27th District in Wyandotte, and Janice O'Neill Robinson, who's a candidate who's not in office right now, but running in another downriver district in the 28th State House District. And, we were able to endorse all of these people because they have been consistent champions on energy, on the environment, on democracy issues in Lansing. And we're going to be making more rounds of endorsements as we go along, but we're excited to, get working to ensure that our members and the public know that, these are people they can trust to stand up and put people over corporate profits. And excited that we're going to get to do that work again going into this fall.
So to get this endorsement, what's the framework like? Like, you look at their voting records. If they're a new candidate and they haven't voted yet, how do they get an endorsement?
Yeah, great question. So we have a pretty extensive, so their voting record, if they're in office, is something that we look at. We also have a candidate questionnaire that gets sent out to all candidates in a race. And then after the questionnaire, we have a state endorsement committee made up of some of our members and some of our allies, lots of folks who then come together and recommend, and will recommend candidates for endorsement, and then they're all voted through. And so, well, again, we have more to come, but that was our first round of State House endorsements for this year. And, we're excited to get to work to make sure we can continue to build power for environmental justice and for the progressive movement here in Lansing.
Fantastic. So Title Track is a C3, so we don't endorse candidates, but we work on education, educating the public, educating candidates, interviewing candidates. And I know that for myself as an individual, Clean Water Action, as well as the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, have helped me in a great deal in terms of the amount of rigorous legwork that you do and analysis that you do to be able to provide detailed information to the general public in election cycles. And you mentioned candidates, but also proposals. And then judges. Sometimes people struggle with judges. Maybe someone identifies with a party, but you don't see that with the judges.
Yeah.
And
the judges are such a critical piece of the ballot, especially this year. We're going to have two state Supreme Court races. And those are on the backside of the ballot. It's kind of confusing because our Supreme Court candidates are nominated by partisan conventions, but they're nonpartisan races. So a lot of people assume if they tick the straight ticket box, that counts for judges too, but it doesn't. You actually have to turn over the back of the ballot and fill the whole thing out. Which I'm getting used to saying because it's July now, and I'm sure I'm going to say that 8 billion times between now and November.
I think we'll see some videos, some instructional infographics.
I think we might.
Yeah, we need it. And the proposals can be pretty misleading too. If people don't put the time in ahead of time to understand, sometimes the language can be inaccessible and convoluted.
Yep.
And I really appreciate the efforts to sort of deconstruct and translate into common, understood layperson's terms, what exactly is going on. So you talked about how, art and spirituality and sort of like creativity and connection are so important, and looking out over movements, at how these have been essential ingredients in any successful movements. I also feel like they're essential ingredients in a life of activism and sort of work for the common good. And you and I are both musicians. So I'd love to just hear from you about how music helps you keep your balance and what you're getting into these days as a musician and multi-instrumentalist.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. I mean, music for me is like it's grounding for this kind of work. Um, and it's also obviously like I think activism a lot of the time is I mean, people kind of think of some of the big moments of activism with lots of protests and public facing things and press conferences and stuff like that. But that's, as you know, Seth, that's a very, very small part of what we do. Most of it is the day-to-day grind of trying to make things happen, say, trying to herd the cats sometimes in organizing, trying to make everything kind of move in the right direction. And to me, music, like that can be a very frustrating process. And it's that persistence of activism day after day after day, I think that often actually is what makes a difference. It's not the big moments, it's all the little things people had to do to lead to the big moments. And it's a frustrating process. And for me, music is, if I go home in the evening, I got like a couple calm down things. I love cooking, and, doing bedtime stories with my daughter, bedtime songs with my son, and then kind of shift into practicing for me, like, practicing I'm mainly playing saxophone and a little piano these days. But practicing for me is just kind of that moment to be able to totally relax, turn my mind off of all the political and activism things going on and focus on one thing. And I love the I feel like there's two different kind of at least two different feelings in the music world about kind of what it is that we do. And there's kind of I think there's a good amount of people and acts and stuff who are like after trying to get really famous. And then there's another group of musicians where it's more like it's closer to being a monk than it is a rock star. It's like trying to improve your craft. And I think of people like the great Sonny Rollins, jazz saxophone player who's in his 90s right now, and he can't play anymore. He kind of got a lung capacity issue going on, from what I've heard, but he kept practicing 4 to 6 hours a day until he was like 90. And somebody asked him late in life, like, why he kept practicing so much. He says, well, I keep seeing some improvements. And, so to hear that from somebody who's been at the top of the game forever, is kind of, I feel like practice is such, just the act of practicing something creative, regardless of what that thing is, I think is a really good, thing for a lot of activists to get into, whether it's visual art, crochet. I know a bunch of people who crochet and do different types of crafts and stuff, or us musicians, that kind of a consistent, steady practice of something that you can, I feel like anything like that with practice time, you just get better and better and better. And you can kind of, that kind of persistence, I guess, can be balancing to the persistence of activism. And then you also have, for me, I play a lot of jazz, blues, funk, stuff like that. I have a jazz, jazz, blues, funk, etc. quartet out of Lansing right now. But we called the Blue Jazz Working Group. We're on Facebook. Folks want to check us out. We actually have 2 activists and 2 professors in the band, which is kind of a fun, a fun equilibrium. That's why we call ourselves a working group, because it's 2 activists and 2 professors. But it's such there's there's then those moments, especially in improvisational music, where, when the right things click on stage, it's just this very satisfying, amazing feeling when things are clicking in an improvisational sense, across a group of people, and you get that kind of collective communication going on. And to me, that's like inspiring for activism at the same time. Like, as like music with the band, when you're working with other people, there has to be kind of like a collective consciousness to be able to actually make things work right. And so being able to like tap into that, it's like, man, I hope we can do that movement wide at some point. So it's a rambly answer, but I love the confluence of like music, art, that piece of life, and that kind of spiritual practice of it, and activism, I think are often pointing similar ways. And the more you read about other movements, there's so many musicians who aren't known for their activism who were activists. Thelonious Monk, the great jazz pianist, was really close with Harry Belafonte and did a whole bunch of like underground benefits for the civil rights movement. You had Coltrane, the great John Coltrane, was kind of, his music was activism in a very real sense. Modern folks, Josh Redman, has some great, his most recent albums, like I think of it as kind of an ode to activism, called Where Are We, which is kind of bookended with with a song that he wrote called After Minneapolis, which is a kind of George Floyd tribute. And that's the beginning of the album, and the end of the album is kind of his take on Alabama, which is a old John Coltrane song that he wrote after the Alabama church bombings. And there's some amazing activism within the music world. And then, of course, there's all the things that Title Track does, and your artists at Title Track, who just have this amazing, I feel like it's a sense of unity between the music and the activism, and how, that's one thing moving forward, like that are craft and necessities for living on planet Earth of activism kind of move step in step at Title Track. It's really awesome.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much. I love these reflections, and I love too how you got into the discipline of music too, and not just music as like a source of relief, because music can also take a lot of hard work, and it can take discipline to be able to have the breakthroughs that we're looking for artistically, just like we are in the world as activists. So that the discipline of music, I feel like, applies to activism in a really wonderful way. And starting with nothing, holding a vision, sharing a vision with others, sharing a discipline, finding ways for people to bring their strengths to the table, listening deeply, and having the confidence and kind of the gall to start with nothing and say, we're going to create this. And right now we've got nothing. It's very similar between music and activism.
It is, yeah. You reminded me kind of one of my favorite Dizzy Gillespie quotes. Some days you get up and put the horn to your chops and it sounds pretty good and you win. Some days you try and nothing works and the horn wins. This goes on, and then you die and the horn wins. It's like, it's true with every instrument. It really does work. But you're building something the entire time.
Right, totally. Dizzy's cheeks win too. I mean,
yeah.
He's
the poster child of why you need to play with proper technique.
So, Sean, thank you so much for your time today. I know you got lots going on. In closing, any final, reflections or calls to action for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be, I think this year is going to be a huge year, regardless of really what happens in November. This is going to be a big year for choices we make here in Michigan and across the country. I think a lot of that choice boils down to whether we're looking at a world where we can continue fighting for the things we believe in, or whether we're looking at a Project 2025 world where, if you haven't looked into Project 2025, please do, but where, activists are punished for their activism, our First Amendment rights really don't exist. It's a stark difference that we're looking at coming into November here. And so I think, there's so many great actions that people can take. We talked about the oil and water don't mix ones. If you go to cleanwateraction.org/MI, we have a lot of actions up people can take. The most important thing that anybody in Michigan can do right now is get on your phone, go to mi.gov/vote, check out your voter registration, make sure that's all accurate. You can register to vote online, you can register to vote on person. But really, everybody's got to get to the polls this year. If there's, if folks aren't really inspired by the top of the ticket, look at some of the local races in your area. We have so many great people trying to do big things in local communities, statewide, everywhere else. And please get to the polls and vote. We need it more now than ever. So, I think that's really the most important thing people can do over the next several months. And then do what they can to get other people to the polls as well. Don't just go yourself, try to bring friends with you, especially friends who don't commonly vote.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sean. Keep up the good work and look forward to playing music with you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Seth. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.